Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Chapter 11. In Her Skin. Loid approached the chair in the corner, where the clothes had been neatly folded with military precision. Each step felt like a negotiation with gravity, his altered center of balance demanding constant micro-adjustments, his legs moving with a fluidity that still caught him off guard. He crouched down, still not used to how differently his joints bent now, and took inventory. The motion itself felt strange, his narrower hips and more flexible spine allowing him to descend in a graceful motion that his former male physique would have executed with more rigidity. A sports bra, black and snug, designed for high-impact activity. A cropped hoodie, sleeveless and cut just above the waist, with a crimson lining. Yoga leggings, matte black with crimson accents down the thighs. A pair of lightweight sneakers, sleek and flexible. And, at the very bottom of the stack, a pair of black lace panties. He stared at that last item for a long moment. The delicate fabric lying innocently on top of the clinical white chair. The lace pattern was intricate, the material thin but durable, practical luxury, the kind that didn't sacrifice function for elegance. The kind that Yor would wear beneath her combat gear. Then sighed. Of course. He picked up the undergarment, holding it between fingers that still felt too slender, too delicate to be his own. The proportions were unmistakably feminine, narrow at the waist, wider at the hips, with just enough material to cover what had not yet fully transformed. Couldn't have gone with something a little less fancy, he muttered to the empty room. Pow! A simple cotton brief would have sufficed. But of course, they had thought of everything. If he was to become Yor in every detail, that included even the clothing, no one would see. The layers beneath the persona. The authenticity that might make the difference between life and death, if, heaven forbid, he were captured and searched. Loid stripped off the hospital garments and folded them with the practiced efficiency of a man who once had to hide identities in seconds. Each movement of his arms felt different. The muscles leaner, the joints more flexible, his shoulders narrower as he bent to place the folded hospital clothes on the chair. He stood for a moment in the cool air of the medical wing, fully exposed in a body that was no longer entirely his. The draft against his skin felt different, more present somehow, as if his nerve endings had been recalibrated to register sensations more intensely. Goosebumps rose on arms that were now slender and graceful, on a torso that had lost its rectangular solidity in favor of subtle curves. He picked up the lace undergarment first. The material was soft, almost fragile. As he stepped into it and pulled it up along his hips, he paused again. The fabric hugged him in a way that was strange, intimate. It clung to curves that should not have been there, to a body shaped by science rather than nature. The elastic waistband settled at a waist that had narrowed dramatically, while the lower portion stretched across hips that had widened to nearly match Yor's distinctive silhouette. More than that, there was no bulge. Not completely flat. Not yet, but enough that the lace rested flush across his pelvis. Where once his manhood had defined his silhouette, now there was only a subtle mound, the final stages of transformation nearly complete. A detail of his identity that had once been so defining now felt like an afterthought. A memory. Well, he murmured, his voice still jarring to his own ears, higher, softer, more musical. That's definitive. The leggings came next. Tight, form-fitting. They clung to every line of his legs, his thighs, his now curvier hips. The fabric stretched smoothly over his fuller backside, accentuating the dramatic changes that had reshaped his lower body. Even the way he moved to pull them up felt different, hips rolling, balance shifting. He had to bend in ways his former body never would have, his spine more flexible, his movements naturally more fluid. The sports bra took some effort. Having never put one on before, he fumbled with the elastic band, stretching it across his back and pulling it down over what had grown overnight. Small but distinct breasts, tender to the touch and impossibly strange to see on his own chest. The compression was unexpected, not painful, but certainly noticeable, a constant reminder of what had changed. Then came the cropped hoodie, soft against his arms, leaving a sliver of his toned, narrowing waist exposed. The fabric settled differently across his shoulders, narrower now, less broad, with a feminine slope that changed how clothing draped across his frame. The cropped cut felt strange, exposing a strip of pale skin around his midriff, a style he would never have chosen for himself, but one that Yor favored for its practicality in combat, allowing full rotational movement without restriction. Finally, the sneakers. Lightweight, designed for agility. His feet slid into them easily, smaller now, narrower, with a higher arch that changed his stance subtly but significantly. The shoes felt different against his altered feet, the cushioning pressing against bones that had reconfigured to a feminine structure, the fit snug around a heel that had become more delicate. He stood and checked his reflection in the small wall mirror. It was like looking at a stranger, but one he was learning to recognize. The woman in the mirror was undeniably beautiful, lithe, athletic, with a dancer's grace and a fighter's coiled strength. Her dark hair framed a face that had completed its transformation overnight, high cheekbones, delicate jaw, full lips and large, expressive eyes that still held Loid's intelligence and wariness within Yor's distinctive features. The outfit was tight, revealing, functional, yes, but undeniably made to accentuate. The leggings hugged every curve of his new lower body. The cropped hoodie emphasized his narrowed waist and the modest swell of his chest, and the exposed strip of midriff drew attention to the dramatic hourglass figure his body had reshaped into. He'd later come to understand why, how Yor had long used her presence as much as her power. Her beauty as a weapon, her body, a tool of distraction and danger alike. Distract with the packaging, kill with the contents, he murmured, recalling one of Yor's more pragmatic observations from a mission briefing. Men never see the blade coming when they're busy staring at your legs. He turned from side to side, studying how the outfit moved with him. Everything fit perfectly, tailored to Yor's exact measurements, which were now, with alarming precision, his own. When he raised his arms, the hoodie lifted slightly, revealing more of his midriff. Skin that was impossibly smooth, pale as porcelain, with the subtle muscle definition that characterized Yor's athletic physique. Christ, he muttered, lowering his arms, even my skin tone has changed. It was true. The slight tan he'd always carried had faded, replaced by Yor's characteristic porcelain complexion. Pale, almost luminous, with a subtle translucency that made the blue veins at his wrists more visible than they'd ever been. He took a breath and turned toward the door. The simple act of inhaling felt different, his lungs compressed by a rib cage that had narrowed, the breath rising higher in his chest rather than deep in his diaphragm as it once had. As he walked, he caught it again. The sway of his hips. Not exaggerated. Not intentional. Just natural now. A shift in anatomy that his body had already learned to move with. His legs moved differently, too. The stride shorter, the steps lighter, his weight rolling from heel to toe in a way that created that distinctive feminine gait. His hand reached for the door panel, and he paused, momentarily distracted by the sight of his own fingers, slender now, with longer nails and more delicate joints. Even his hands had been rewritten, The calluses he'd built over years of combat training smoothed away, replaced by Yor's more elegant but equally lethal digits. It was all new, all disorienting. And as his hand touched the door panel, he couldn't help but think, I hope this all goes back to normal when this is done. But even as the thought formed, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered an uncomfortable truth. What if it doesn't? What if this is permanent? What if the body you've known for 30 years is gone forever, replaced by this stranger you're still learning to inhabit? He pushed the doubt away. There was no room for uncertainty. Not now. Not when the mission hung in the balance. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Loid stepped through it, into the hallway beyond, and toward the training center, where the next phase of Operation Mirror Blade awaited. His footsteps were lighter now, his posture naturally straighter, his transformed body moving with a confidence his mind was still struggling to catch up to. He was aware of eyes on him as he walked, staff members pausing in their tasks, other agents doing double takes as they passed. Not just because of who he was becoming, but because of how complete the transformation appeared. It wasn't just that he looked like Yor, he moved like her, his body carrying itself with the same lethal grace that had always made her presence so distinctive. Agent Forger, called a voice from behind him. He turned, the motion fluid and immediate. Another change, the way his body pivoted now, core muscles engaging differently than they once had. It was Sylvia, her expression as unreadable as ever, though her eyes widened fractionally as she took in his appearance. Or should I say, Miss Briar, she added, her voice carefully neutral. The resemblance is remarkable. Still Forger, Loid replied, his higher voice giving the words a different cadence. At least in here. He tapped his temple lightly. Of course. Sylvia fell into step beside him, her movements brisk and efficient next to his new fluid gait. The physical transformation appears to be proceeding even faster than projected. Dr. Halvitz is beside himself with excitement. Glad someone's enjoying this, Loid muttered. How does it feel? Sylvia asked, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of genuine curiosity. Being in her body. Strange, Loid admitted after a moment. Like wearing a costume I can't take off. Everything works, but nothing feels like mine. I move, and my body responds in ways I don't expect. I reach for something, and my arm is shorter than I remember. I stand up and the world is taller. The disorientation will fade, Sylvia said with clinical confidence. Your brain will adjust to the new proprioceptive feedback. In a week, you'll move like you've always had this body. That's what I'm afraid of, Loid said quietly. They walked in silence for a moment, the contrast between them now more pronounced than ever. Sylvia tall and angular in her crisp suit, Loid smaller, more compact, his transformed body moving with a fluid grace that made even simple walking seem choreographed. For what it's worth, Sylvia said finally, what you're doing, it's beyond what we would ask of any agent. Even you. And yet here we are, Loid replied, gesturing to his transformed body. Here we are, Sylvia agreed. She paused at a junction in the corridor. The training center is through there. They're waiting for you. Loid nodded, then hesitated. Have you seen her, Yor? This morning, Sylvia confirmed. No change in her condition. Stable, but still critical. Loid's jaw tightened, the muscle moving differently across his reshaped face. She deserves better than this. She does, Sylvia agreed. Which is why you're going to make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Loid alone in the corridor, facing the doors that would lead him deeper into his new reality. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Loid stepped through it, into the hallway beyond, and toward the training center, where the next phase of Operation Mirror Blade awaited. Chapter 12. Weaponized elegance. The training center was unlike anything Loid had experienced before. It was less battlefield, more ballet studio, by way of Assassin's dojo, mirrored walls, reinforced flooring, motion capture rigs lining the perimeter. The space was vast, clinical in its precision, with lighting designed to eliminate shadows and expose every flaw in technique. A dozen training staff moved in synchrony, each with tablets, watching him constantly, measuring every step, every breath, every mistake. As he entered, conversations stopped. Eyes tracked his movement, analytical, assessing, comparing what they saw to the metrics they'd memorized. To them, he wasn't Loid Forger struggling with a transformed body. He was a project, an asset being calibrated to exacting specifications. Agent Forger, greeted the lead instructor, a severe woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes swept over him, coolly professional. Or should I call you Miss Briar now? Forger is fine, Loid replied, his altered voice still jarring even to his own ears. Higher, melodic, with a softness his male voice had never possessed. For now, she conceded with a thin smile. But soon enough, you'll need to answer to both names, without hesitation. Your survival will depend on it. She gestured to a curved screen that dominated one wall. We begin with observation. The body you now inhabit moves in specific ways, patterns that have been noticed, catalogued, and expected by your target. Deviation means detection. Detection means failure. The day began with videos. Footage of both in her civilian life and in her combat persona. Walking, sitting, speaking, fighting. Endless loops of surveillance footage. Training sessions. Mission recordings. Her every mannerism displayed in high definition. Loid watched in silence as she moved with a grace that was both effortless and lethal. Her body was a contradiction. Elegant yet brutal, soft curves, masking deadly precision. Note the hip rotation when she walks, the instructor pointed out. 43 degrees, not the exaggerated swing of someone playing at femininity. Efficient, purposeful movement. Loid observed intently, cataloging details he'd never consciously registered, despite living with Yor for months. The way she tilted her head when listening, the precise angle of her posture when seated, the fluid arc of her arm when reaching for something. Her combat style is unique, continued the instructor, switching to footage of Yor in action. Most female assassins rely on agility alone. Yor combines it with devastating rotational power. Her signature move. The spinning heel kick, Loid finished, eyes locked on the screen where Yor executed the move with lethal precision, her body a blur of controlled violence. Generated from the hips, amplified through the core, delivered with pinpoint accuracy. The instructor raised an eyebrow. You've studied her. I've worked with her, Loid corrected. There's a difference. And now you'll become her, she replied coolly. Starting now. Then came the movement drills. The sneakers he'd worn earlier were replaced without ceremony by heels, sharp, black, and just high enough to be punishing. He stared at them. These weapons disguised as footwear, trying to imagine how anyone fought effectively while balanced on what amounted to stylish daggers. These are ridiculous, he muttered, sliding his transformed feet into them. The fit was perfect, his feet having shrunk and narrowed to match Yor's delicate but strong arches. Those ridiculous shoes have facilitated 17 confirmed kills, the instructor informed him. Yor can run, jump, and execute perfect roundhouse kicks in heels twice that height. Your mission requires you to do the same. He had barely taken 3 steps before stumbling, his altered center of gravity betraying him. His transformed body, lighter, differently balanced, with weight distributed in unfamiliar ways, fought against the unnatural posture the heels demanded. Again, the instructor said, arms folded. Loid grit his teeth, adjusted his balance, and walked again. This time he managed 6 steps before his ankle wobbled, sending him lurching sideways. "Your hips are too rigid," the instructor critiqued. "You're fighting your new anatomy instead of using it. Your center of gravity is lower now. Use it. Let your hips counterbalance the forward tilt the heels create." It was humiliating, frustrating. But he was a professional, and professionals adapt. By midday his stride had smoothed. His hips moved with intention, creating a subtle sway that wasn't exaggerated but natural, the necessary counterbalance to maintain equilibrium on the punishing heels. He began to understand how Yor's balance worked, how her posture shifted, how her body flowed. Hours of repetition burned the movements into his muscles. "Better?" the instructor acknowledged grudgingly. "Now let's add combat elements." What followed was brutal. A series of increasingly complex maneuvers performed in the restrictive footwear. Kicks, spins, evasions, all executed while balanced on those deadly heels. His transformed body responded differently than he expected, faster in some ways, with unexpected flexibility, but with less raw power than he was accustomed to. "You're still punching like a man," the instructor criticized after one particularly aggressive sequence. "Yor doesn't rely on brute force. She uses acceleration and precision. Less shoulder, more core rotation." Sweat trickled down his transformed back, following the new curve of his spine. His altered body processed exertion differently, his skin flushing more visibly, his breathing quicker and shallower due to his reduced lung capacity. "Again," she commanded. And again he went, his body learning with each repetition how to move in this new configuration, how to generate power from his hips rather than his shoulders, how to use his lower center of gravity as an advantage rather than a liability. Then came voice training. A long glass booth, a headset, audio clips of your speaking in different tones, casual, commanding, lethal. The technician explained that his vocal cords had physically transformed, but muscle memory and speech patterns needed to be consciously remapped. "Yor speaks from higher in her throat," the voice coach explained. "Her cadence is measured, with subtle rises at the end of declarative sentences. She rarely uses filler words, and her laugh has a distinctive 3-note pattern." Loid repeated each line over and over, until the technician monitoring him gave a slow nod of approval. His voice, already altered by the transformation, gradually shifted from simply being higher-pitched to matching Yor's distinctive timbre. That particular blend of sweetness and steel that characterized her speech. "Perfect match," they said. "You're speaking in her register now, even when you're not thinking about it." The afternoon continued with integrated training, movement and voice together, creating the full illusion of Yor's presence. With each passing hour, Loid felt less like he was imitating her, and more like his body was remembering patterns it had always known. By late afternoon, he was exhausted, not just from the physical effort, but from the creeping sense that he was disappearing beneath the surface, replaced by something else. Someone else. His transformed body ached in unfamiliar ways, muscles he'd never consciously used before protesting their sudden activation. The bones of his feet throbbed from hours in heels, his lower back strained from the altered posture they demanded. Even his facial muscles felt tired from practicing Yor's expressions, the particular way she smiled, the subtle arch of her eyebrow when skeptical. Medical check, 1847. The day ended with another exam. Dr. Halvitz waited in the medical suite, tablet in hand, practically vibrating with scientific excitement as Loid entered. The room was stark, clinical, with monitoring equipment humming softly along one wall, and a full-length mirror positioned at a deliberate angle. "Remarkable progress," Halvitz enthused, circling Loid like an art dealer praising a valuable sculpture. The accelerated adaptation continues to exceed all projections. Your physiological integration with the template is nearly complete. Spare me the scientific rhapsody, Loid said tiredly, his voice now effortlessly matching Yor's cadence. Just tell me what's changed since this morning. Oh, everything, Halvitz replied with genuine wonder. And nothing. The transformation is reaching its final equilibrium. His torso had shortened again, his ribcage narrower, his shoulders now unmistakably feminine, with that characteristic slope that softened his silhouette. Even his arms had continued to change, losing the last vestiges of masculine muscle definition, in favor of lean, elegant lines that matched Yor's toned but distinctly feminine physique. The technician instructed him to disrobe for measurements. As he removed the training outfit, he caught a glimpse of himself in the full-length mirror in the examination room and barely recognized the reflection. Breasts were forming now. Not implants. Not padding. Real. Natural. Halfway there. Small but perfectly shaped, they rose from his chest in gentle curves that matched Yor's modest but proportional endowment. The skin there was pale, sensitive, with rosy nipples that responded to the cool air of the examination room. His waist had narrowed to an almost impossible degree, creating that distinctive hourglass silhouette that characterized Yor's figure. His hips had widened to match, bones and muscles reconfigured to create the perfect counterbalance. His hair had grown again, past his shoulders now, silken and dark, framing a face that was no longer Loid's. Not even close. His features had completed their transformation overnight. High cheekbones, delicate jaw, full lips, and large eyes framed by thick lashes. Yor's face, looking back at him with an expression of wary uncertainty that was all his own. And then, the most striking change. His manhood, what was left of it, had begun to retreat, not just in size, but in visibility. The doctors had warned him this stage would be unsettling, and they were right. The transformation of his most fundamentally male characteristic into its female counterpart was the final, irrevocable step in his metamorphosis. He didn't notice at first. Not until he peeled off the training gear, prepping for the shower. He looked down and gasped. He looked like a woman. Completely. Where once his male anatomy had protruded, now there was only a smooth mound with the delicate folds of female genitalia. The transformation had accelerated dramatically in just the hours he'd been training, completing what had begun days ago. Tentatively, he reached down, fingers brushing over skin that was smooth, flat, feminine. There was no bulge, no trace of what had once been there, at least, not without closer inspection. His fingers encountered only softness, the strange new contours of a body that had been completely rewritten. The structure hadn't fully changed, not yet, but the illusion was perfect. To any observer, to any medical exam, he would register as completely female. His fingers traced the new anatomy with clinical detachment that couldn't quite mask his shock. The transformation more complete than he'd been prepared for. The genital inversion is approximately 95% complete, Halvitz noted, scanning him with a handheld device that beeped softly. Internal structures are still finalizing, but external appearance is now within target parameters. Meaning? Loid asked, his voice tight. Meaning you're now physically indistinguishable from Yor Briar. Halvitz replied. Down to the cellular level. Blood type, DNA, fingerprints, all identical. Even the most sophisticated medical scan would identify you as her. His breath caught in his throat. He was almost there. Almost her. The final physiological changes will complete themselves overnight, Halvitz continued, making notes on his tablet. By morning, the transformation will be 100% complete. Congratulations, Agent Forger. You've made history. Lucky me. Loid murmured, unable to tear his eyes away from his reflection. This stranger's body that was now irrevocably his own. "You're free to use the facilities," Halvet said, gesturing to the adjoining bathroom. "Tomorrow we begin the final phase of integration training. Rest well." The medical team filed out, leaving Loid alone with his transformed body and the weight of what was to come. He stepped toward the shower, the fogged glass door cool beneath his fingers. He hesitated for a moment, not out of shame, but from the sheer, overwhelming reality pressing in. The final acknowledgement that the body he had inhabited for 30 years was gone, replaced by this new form that moved and felt and responded in ways he was still learning to understand. Then, silently, he opened the door and stepped inside. The water cascaded over him, following new contours, pooling in curves that hadn't existed days ago. His transformed body registered the sensation differently, his skin more sensitive, the temperature seeming hotter against nerve endings that had been recalibrated to a different sensitivity threshold. He closed his eyes, letting the water sluice away the sweat and tension of the day. In darkness, without visual confirmation of what had happened to him, he could almost pretend, almost forget. But then he moved. An unfamiliar weight shifted on his chest. He reached for the soap, and slender fingers closed around it. He washed, and his hands encountered only smooth curves where once there had been angular planes. There was no escaping the truth, even with his eyes closed. His body had been unmade and remade. Loid Forger had been erased, cell by cell, and in his place stood a perfect copy of Yor Briar. The mission demanded nothing less than total transformation. And that's exactly what he had become. Totally transformed.